先生们，大家好！欢迎大家参加由招商银行私人银行和沃辛顿生活格调共同举办的罗斯柴尔德家族酒窖私访活动。我是来自沃辛顿生活格调的 Emma， 今天非常高兴能够在这个风景如画的庄园沃德斯登庄园给大家进行活动的直播。我们都知道，罗斯柴尔德家族是世界久负盛名的金融家族，自19世纪起。随着家族事业的不断的发展与繁荣，罗斯柴尔德家族在欧洲建造了近50多栋这样子的豪宅建筑。然而，至今仍然保存完好的是仅存的在英国的这栋沃德斯东庄园。在这个精美绝伦的法兰西风格的建筑里面，收藏着家族几代人所收纳的艺术珍宝。然而，使之更为特别的是，在这个建筑的下面蕴藏着罗斯柴尔德家族最大也是最重要的葡萄酒酒窖。那么今天我们就将去探访这个酒窖，在那里将接待我们的是这个酒窖的设计者，也是罗斯柴尔德男爵的葡萄酒顾问，英国女王伊丽莎白2世的葡萄酒顾问 Ben Howkins 先生，他将引领我们进入这个顶级葡萄酒的世界。下面就请跟随我进入酒窖。这是酒窖的大门，然后大家可以看到非常复古的感觉。Thank you very much.
Oh, hello. Okay.
Thank you. 的这个位置呢，就是罗斯柴尔德沃德斯登庄园酒窖的大厅。我们今天非常荣幸的邀请到英国女王的葡萄酒顾问、罗斯柴尔德家族的葡萄酒顾问 Ben Howkins 先生来到我们活动的现场。同时呢，我们今天也非常高兴，招商银行私人银行伦敦中心的负责人黄渤先生也和我们在一起。下面就让我们首先有请黄先生给我们说几句话。有请。
谢谢。各位在线上的招商银行私人银行贵宾，大家晚上好！非常高兴今天能有这样一个机会，和我们的合作伙伴沃辛顿生活格调一起，为大家呈现一场全新的线上体验活动。想必大家都知道，19世纪发迹于德国法兰克福的罗斯柴尔德家族，先后在伦敦、巴黎等欧洲5大城市设立银行，并成为当时全球最大的金融帝国。那200多年过去了，今天作为中国最优秀的私人银行，招商银行，我们肩负着每一位家族给予我们的财富传承的重托。我们今天在这里，通过沃德斯登酒窖这一家族财富的珍宝，与罗斯柴尔德家族展开一场跨时空的对话，带领每一位客户领略其背后的传奇色彩。招商银行伦敦分行私人银行于2020年1月正式成立。目前，我们已经可以通过面向我们境内的私行客户，提供包括基础结算、存款汇兑、保险以及房屋购房按揭贷款在内的各项金融服务。如果您有相关的需求，您可以与您境内的客户经理取得联系，然后与我们取得联系。无论您是希望在英国投资购房，或者是希望将您英国住房资金进行归集，亦或是希望管理您留学子女的海外的费用，我们都可以为您提供定制化的金融服务综合解决方案。另外，我们后续还将举办一系列与英伦生活情调相关的活动，如果您有相关的需求，也请持续对我们保持关注。好，谢谢。
非常感谢黄先生，有请黄先生就座。那接下去呢，我就将有请 Ben Howkins 先生来给我们介绍一下罗斯柴尔德家族以及罗斯柴尔德家族的藏酒。之后，他还会带领我们一起去参观整个的酒窖，去探寻那些百年珍藏。那今天我们的活动全程呢配备中英文同声传译服务。如果大家想要收听中文翻译，可以在视窗下方的传译频道中选择中文。如果您是用手机或者是平板电脑来观看我们的直播，那您也可以在其他这个目录中找到传译这个功能。如果您有任何的问题，可以在问答框中给我们留言。 下面就让我先来采访一下我们的 Ben Howkins 先生。Hi Ben, it is a great honor to have you here.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and our distinguished guests are very keen to know your story. So would you like to start by telling us something about the Rothschild family and the Waddlesdon Manor?
Thank you. Well, yes, I would. I would very much. And a huge welcome to you all here. And if Lord Rothschild was here, I know he would say hello himself. But here we are in the wine cellars of Waddlesdon Manor, itself a most amazing house. But before we talk about Waddlesdon, I just thought we might recap a little bit on the Rothschild family and how they became so preeminent. And everybody has to start somewhere, and the Rothschilds started in a Jewish ghetto in Frankfurt in Germany about 200 years ago. And the father of the family, Mayor Amschel Rothschild, was a very dynamic person, and he set out deliberately to create a family dynasty, which in essence became the first international merchant bankers, the Rothschilds. And he summoned his five sons to join him in his firm. He didn't trust his daughters, nor sons-in-laws, but it was sons only. And he dispatched each one of the sons to the major capital cities of Europe at that time. So one went to Naples in Italy, one went to Paris in France, one went to Vienna in Austria, one came to London in England, and the other stayed in Frankfurt. As so often in banking, as in life, timing is everything. And at that time, in the early 1800s, the Emperor Napoleon was strutting the European stage and causing havoc in Portugal, England, places. And so it was at the time in Waterloo, basically, by that time, the Rothschilds had become the merchant bankers to the Allies. They had a courier service that got information quicker than any other government, and they became indispensable to the various governments in Europe. And that's where they made their money. And over the next 50 years or so, they built 50 houses like this in Europe. And this is the only one still standing. So this was built by Baron Ferdinand Rothschild. And he built it really to house his collection of art, because like good merchant bankers, they then spent their money on art and on philanthropy. And so this 222-bedroom house, the 222-room house, was actually built to house his collection and to entertain. Very important entertaining. Queen Victoria came here and various other notable people.
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating story. And so what brought the family into the wine business?
Well, the family were, by this time, were great collectors. They couldn't stop collecting. I mean, they upstairs is the finest collection of French furniture outside the Palace of Versailles. They collected paintings, sand, china, everything. So it was natural that they would turn their sights onto another of life's great enrichments, which is wine. And there were two great chateaus came up for sale, one after the other. In 1852, Baron Nathaniel bought Chateau Mouton Rothschild. And in 1868, Baron James bought Chateau Lafite Rothschild. These are the cellars here under Chateau Lafite Rothschild. So they came into the world of wine, and admittedly, it did take 100 years to make a profit at Chateau Lafite. So it's a very good reason to keep it outside the business. They always kept their wine interests outside their business interests. So now they have vineyards in Chile, in Argentina, in California, really all over, in South Africa, all over the world. So they are really the first family of wine.
Yeah, very impressive. So I know that you are a good friend of Lord Rothschild, and you are also the curator of the Cellar. So what made you take on such a landmark project?
Well, again, timing is everything. And I'd written to Lord Rothschild about a quite separate matter in the early 1990s. What I didn't know was that in the last 6 months, he'd inherited the responsibility of Waddesdon, and being passionate about wine, being a great wine collector, he was a shareholder of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, but he wanted to do more with wine. So he wanted to completely resurrect these wonderful wine cellars under Waddesdon. And my name came up, and so I never built a cellar before, but anyway, I had to start somewhere. And we brought in, well, look next door at the moment, we brought in 15,000 bottles of Chateau Lafite Rothschild and its wine. So it's an amazing collection next door. Then we started having events here, and then we opened the wine shop, which has now expanded wonderfully, and is a very important part of our retail business there. So that's how I got involved, and I was very happy to be involved.
Very, very impressive and very, very amazing as well. So would you like to show us around the cellar?
Very happy to. Very happy to.
Thank you.
Let's start first of all by looking at this rather splendid collection here of bottles, and Lord Rothschild has a wonderful idea when inviting guests to dinner by showing large bottles, large format bottles, double magnums, and so on there, and asking his guests to sign the back of the back of the bottle. That's great. So let me draw your attention to this slightly smaller than normal size bottle, which is the Chateau Lafite 1787, which was in the possession of the President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, and was sold for a record then of £105,000. That's pretty special. This bottle is signed by Prince Philip, who just sadly died in 1999, and Queen Elizabeth. And this bottle is signed by late Princess Diana, amongst other notables there. And to your left, you'll see at the top the Queen of England in the cellar, where we are now, Lord Rothschild behind her. Here we have Lord Rothschild showing Prince Charles some wines, again in the cellar. And here we have Lord Rothschild with the Queen of England and Baroness Philippine behind. Now let's look at these rather splendid labels over here. That's Chateau Lafite Rothschild Manor. This is Chateau Mouton Rothschild, quite separate but next door. And they had the very innovative idea, gosh, in the 1930s, of asking a world-famous artist to dedicate a drawing or a painting of their own for each new vintage of Chateau Mouton Rothschild. So amongst here, you've got Pablo Picasso, you've got Andy Warhol, you've got Francis Bacon, and you've got Salvador Dali. So wine and art are a very strong combination. And what I now want to introduce you to, if I may, is a brand new wine publishing company run by my colleague, Mai Ireland, who will explain everything.
Hello, it's so lovely to be here with you all today. As Ben said, I'm the Managing Director for Academy du Vin Library. We're a very young independent wine book publisher. We were founded by Ben and his friends Stephen Spurrier and Hugh Johnson, all of whom are our authors. We firmly believe that the more you know about wine, the more you will enjoy it, the better the wine you will drink will be. And we are passionate about publishing the best wine books. We've become very well respected in the last 2 years in the wine world everywhere, and we're hoping to publish in Mandarin very soon. We publish books about legendary winemakers, Serge Rochard from Chateau-Muzar in Lebanon, Fiona Morrison, who's a master of wine, went and spent time with 10 great wine families in Europe. And then we have books by some of the best legendary wine writers in the world, including Hugh Johnson and André Simon. This is our limited edition slipcase. It's our first collection of our first 8 books. It's just about to be published. We think this will give you hours of entertainment and enjoyment and, importantly, education. And we believe that it is an absolutely integral part of your wine cellar. So buy some wine and have the books alongside so that you can get the most out of them. Please do talk to your bankers contacts for more information about this. Back to you, Ben and Emma.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Right. Shall we go and look at the wine vaults?
Yes, sure.
Follow me. Now, the wines are split into 3 vaults, and they all are at ideal temperatures, which means that they don't get too cold, they don't get too warm, and the humidity is just right. So, which is very important in a wine cellar. Otherwise, the wine gets cooked if it's too warm, and if it's too humid, then the labels fall off the bottles. So I'm hoping in the next few minutes just let's talk through about wine collection and wine investment. But meanwhile, let's just tiptoe in here. This is only, we hope when you all come here to Waddesdon in person, that you may be allowed to cross this threshold, but it's a pretty special threshold to cross. Now, when Lord Rothschild asked me to create a wine cellar here, I'd never created a wine cellar before, but I did know one big wine cellar in the middle of London, and that was at Buckingham Palace. And because I had been fortunate enough to sit on the Royal Household Wine Committee of Buckingham Palace, where 6 of us, mainly the chairman of the wine merchants who had the royal warrant to supply the Queen with wine, and we used to meet there and we used to taste the wines there. And so what I did was I took the concept and the principle of very traditional wine cellar. And as you can see, each bin is divided into roughly, we'll take 60 or 70 dozen here, and then very straightforward base here, and then laths, wooden laths, chestnut laths here, so the bottles lie on each other with a slight incline towards the middle, because there it makes sure that the cork is kept moist, which is very important. So based on Buckingham Palace, I thought it was not a bad idea. Jacob Rothschild liked it, and so my first task was to bring in 15,000 bottles of Chateau Lafite and other wines here, as I've mentioned. Now, you'll also see that there are different bottle sizes here, and the wines from Lafite, as other great chateaus, are bottled in half bottles, magnums, double magnums, Jeroboams, imperials. And I kind of like large bottles. I think it creates a party atmosphere. And if you have a sufficient number of guests that you like sufficiently to offer them some of your best wines, then having one bottle does create a kind of all-inclusive ambiance. So all these 3 working cellars, bottles are taken out and enjoyed by Lord Rothschild and friends, or given as wedding presents. And then each year, the latest vintage will come in and find a place amongst these shelves here. So a question that we're often asked is, okay, so what's the oldest bottle that you have in the cellar? And the oldest one I can absolutely clearly point to is a Magnum of Chateau Rothschild, 1870. That is now 150. That is now 150 years old plus. Hasn't been lying there all this time. It's been lying there for the last 30 years. But before that, it was lying absolutely at Chateau Rothschild itself. All these wines have come directly from the chateau. And that again is very important when you come to Provenance. And we all know, sadly in China, there's quite a lot of fake Chateau Lafite, Chateau Lafite, which is not Chateau Lafite. They put some other wine in there. So it's very important when you're looking at getting involved in wine, is that the winemakers take a huge amount of care to produce the finest wine. It's then bottled, usually at the chateau or domain or anywhere in the vineyard. It then is brought over from whichever country to the point of consumption. And all should be done in refrigerated vans and this sort of thing. So it's very important that when it comes into your house, into your home, into your office, into wherever it is, that it continues on its journey of best provenance. And that, again, I say, is the right temperature and the right ambiance here. So the other thing I just really want to really say, really, to give confidence to everybody, if you need confidence, as we all do from time to time when it comes to wine. There are several ways of buying wine before you drink it. First of all, you just buy it. You go into a shop, you go into a wine merchant, and then you buy your wine and you take it home and you enjoy it with friends or by yourself, and that's fine. Secondly, you collect wine. Now, by collecting wine, what I mean there is that you have sufficient wine, numbers of bottles of wine. It could be 12 bottles, it could be 1,200 bottles, it could be 10,000 bottles, it doesn't matter. Which means that they stay in your home, in your house, in your cellar, in your wine room, which means you can, at any time, say, I think I'll try this bottle, I think I'll try that bottle. So that is collection, and you can build up a collection into a massive collection. The third way is to invest. And this is always a one that needs definition. As you all know, the values of wine can go up and down as the value of anything else. And but if you want to invest, then what I would suggest you do is you talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about, wine merchant. You then keep that wine under bond in whichever country is suitable. And then you sell it. You usually make a profit. If you make a profit after 5, 8 years, that's some time scale there. But the best thing is to, if you want to buy wine, is to start your own collection. Doesn't matter how big, but just start a collection that you feel comfortable with, and then you can give your friends huge pleasure. The more you learn about wine, and Hermione was talking about these wonderful books here. These are books about behind the label, the personalities, the characters behind all these wines. And yes, you need to know what's got the right score, whether it's got 96 points or 90 points, whatever it is there. But that's only one part of it. It's really it's another element of something which is very much part of culture, Western culture, and will soon, I'm sure, be part of Chinese culture as well. So, shall we go and taste some wines?
Yes, sure.
Wave to our friendly Bacchus, standing in the middle of the room, the god of wine. He looks happy enough. Peter,
Ben,
Good to see you.
Wonderful to see you. How are you?
Peter is the responsible for everything to do with wine at Waddlesdon. Very important man. So what have you got for us this morning, Peter?
Well, Ben, as with all good wine preparation, it's important that you make a conscious decision to open the bottle in good time. I hear a lot of my customers and clients alike that will rush to open a bottle of wine. My personal opinion, and I'm sure Ben will echo my sentiments, is that when you have a special bottle that you plan to open, you need to plan in good time the preparation involved and the food that should be compared with that individual wine. I hear a lot of stories of people grabbing a bottle in a kind of rush sense from the cellar, tucking it under their arm and then walking to a friend's house or a restaurant. And what happens here is you disturb the sediment in the bottle. So when you eventually come to open that bottle, the wine might be slightly murky, it lacks clarity, it lacks precision. So as with preparation with a fine dish, there's a lot of ingredients and preparation that goes into this. And I think you should always select a bottle that you want to drink the night before. So this is a bottle of 2015 Chateau Lafite, which I selected from the vaults yesterday. They're all stored on their side, so the wine remains in contact with the cork, which is really, really important. And what that means is that the liquid hits the bottom of the cork and will remain a moisture effective seal, so that the cork won't crack and oxygen won't go in and wine won't come out. That's important for the longevity of the wine and to keep the freshness of the wine, which is really, really crucial. So after selecting from the vaults, I stand the bottle up for about 12 hours, and that means all the sediment can fall to the bottom of the bottle. So when you carefully decant the wine, your wine should have a really bright, vivacious, almost shimmering edge. So lots of colour, it's not dull, its clarity is not affected, it's bright, it's shiny and it's clear. If you ever have a wine that's lacking that intensity and that sparkle in the glass, chances are it's either past maturity, it hasn't been stored well, or the preparation of decanting has been rushed, which is really, really something you should try and avoid. So Ben, this is 2015 Chateau Lafite, and this has been in a decanter for coming up to 3 hours. So it's just had enough oxygen exposure. The temperature from the cellars is about 13, 14 degrees. That's risen to about 18 degrees, perfect serving temperature. I think we should have a glass.
I think we should certainly have a glass. Thank you, Peter, so much. Just whilst we're having a glass, which, gosh, let me just endorse totally what Peter's saying, carrying on, is that the whole point of decanting and having a large glass like this is to let the wine breathe, get in contact with air. And sometimes, again, I've heard various friends opening up old bottles of wine, really old bottles of wine, 50, and they open it up and say, "Oh, I've been keeping this bottle for so long." I open it up and it's gone off. And Peter, I keep saying to his friend, the wine has not gone off. If you had been trapped in a bottle for 50 years and suddenly been allowed out, you'd feel a bit sort of sweaty. And that's what a wine feels, a bit sweaty. So there's a bit of a bottle stick of these really old wines there. So that's one point I think is really important for those who are opening really old bottles of wine. But the second thing is let it swirl around like this. And again, often dinner parties, somebody says, "Gosh, the second glass of wine tastes so much better than the first." And the reason is that not just you've had a glass of wine, of course that's partial, but also that actually the second glass of wine has had more time to have air and to be aerated.
To echo what Ben said, that's particularly important with older vintages. So a lot of the time the flavours can be almost locked down within the wine itself. You show it a bit of oxygen, not only does the texture improve, it becomes more expansive on the palate. You have this wonderful array of aroma as well. And I think that's probably more prominent with the Lafite than it is any other wine. So for me, Lafite is the finest of the first grace. It's the most elegant, it's the most sophisticated, and aromatically it offers the most as well. But you have to treat it in the right way. It does need some oxygen. It does need looking after to show those really complex, delicate secondary and tertiary aromas you get.
I'm so glad we're talking about it, we're drinking it, but just to absolutely echo that point, is that often in wine competitions, you get wines that are very full, very alcoholic, very fat, and people say, "Oh, fantastic!" But you can't drink those wines because they're too full and fat. Lafite is like, you may or may not agree with it. Lafite is like a painting that you have a gallery full of wonderful art, and that painting there will absolutely wow you as you come in, saying, "This is the most amazing thing." Yeah. And then another painting there will just sit quietly there, waiting for your eye to descend on it. And then you look at them for a bit and you realize that big chap there is not actually something you can live with. But the slightly beautifully produced, balanced painting there, yeah, that you can enjoy there. So I think this is very much Lafite. You have to discover it.
I think Lafite's almost like one of those kind of old friends that doesn't talk much, but when they do talk, they're worth listening to. Just seems to have so much more layers and complexity and elegance of all the first growths, and debatably one of the longest lived as well because of how fine the tannin is. Before we talk about this one in particular, I think we should probably explain to our guests what makes Lafite so special in terms of the vineyard. So Lafite's in total 112 hectare vineyard split into 3 plots in an Appalachian called Pauillac on the west bank of the Gironde estuary between Saint Juliette and Saint Estèphe in the north. So this parcel of land, there's vines planted since the 12th century, but the Rothschilds owned this pile of land since 1868, and they've still got vines on this plot that were first planted when they acquired the estate. So a lot of these vines are very, very old. I mean, they have a really deep, complex
I think the
established
average age is about 40 years old.
40 years for
Twice
these one
as
vans. So I don't think anything less than 35 years goes into the top wine. So these root systems are really complex and very deep rooted. So the fruit that each vine produces is not abundant in yield, but it's abundant in quality. So they produce a small yield of concentrated thick skin grape varieties, which gives you all the concentration of flavor and complexity and the chance for essentially for them to last longer in the cellar. And it's its proximity to the Gironde estuary, which helps to moderate. If you have a really warm vintage like 2015, like 2020, Lafite somehow, this kind of magical, somehow keeps its elegance. So if you've got other producers in Pauillac or even further afield in Bordeaux producing wines that are 14 or even 15% ABV, Lafite, regardless of the temperature of the vintage, keeps that kind of fine bone of acidity, that kind of undercurrent of minerality. It never loses that sense of its house style. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I think that that it's really interesting showing the 2015. Just a little point on 2015. Coming in towards and up the drive, you might have seen 2 massive great glass candlesticks. Well, those in fact are magnums, obviously empty magnums, of the 2015 vintage, and there are over 1,000 of them in those 2 candlesticks there. So this is very much a Waddesdon wine. Well, what I was going to say was that had we been standing here, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is that, and had we been broaching a 6-year-old Chateau Lafite, it would be much less drinkable than this is now. And that is because in the intervening years, the producers have worked out exactly how to test the ripeness of the tannin in the pips in the grape. So they know exactly, almost the hour, as to when best to pick them. So that tannin that you get in these young wines, particularly, which kind of prevented you enjoying them young, and it's the same in other grape, some red wines as well. So wines like Lafite can now be enjoyed much sooner than they could otherwise be, but that doesn't detract. You would agree, it doesn't detract the length of time that they will stay.
No, exactly. They will keep, if cellared well, and goes back to my original point, if cellared well, you can easily expect a fine vintage of Lafite to last 50, 60, 70 years and north of that. And they almost become slightly lighter on their feet as they age, but almost slightly more refined as well and delicate. And those tannins don't disappear, they just support the fruit in a different way. You have this wonderful, almost kind of pencil lead, that kind of earthy minerality, but you still got that wonderful core of really suave and elegant red and black fruit, which is Lafitte's kind of signature style.
Now, you don't have to drink Lafitte every day. I mean, that is probably not the best way to look after your bank balance. But what is a good thing to know is that Lafitte produces a second wine, Carouard, and a third wine. But also it owns various other chateaux in Bordeaux. And with various three elements of the Rothschild family, they own between them, God knows how many vineyards, but they own vineyards in Chile, Argentina, Napa Valley, certainly California,
South Africa, and China as well.
And now China as well, exactly.
So there's 26 properties globally, all three branches of the family work with, and they produce between 135 and 142 different wines every year, depending on vintage. But they've all, the three families, so Mouton, Lafitte and Clark, have all got different ways to approach wine tasting, the way wine's produced, who it's sold to, how it's marketed, and ultimately what it tastes like as well.
And I was talking about provenance in the cellar, and again, it all starts really with the soil, with the terroir, and then the raw material, which is the vine. But then once the wine's been produced, the Rothschilds have their own cooperage, they have their own forest, and they own their own oak trees, and they have their own cooperage, and they export these barrels to Chile. And
Chile, Los Vascos uses Lafitte's barrels.
Absolutely. So again, it's a very inclusive thing. And so I think that what's wonderful, since I've been in this game, and Peter certainly, is how diverse wine's become. And it means that anybody coming into the world of wine can come in at any level. There's now much better wine being made around the world. There's far less cases of wine that you really couldn't drink that. But this is the top. I mean, here we are coming in at Waddesdon, quite rightly, whereas Lafitte was bought by the Rothschilds. This was built by the Rothschilds. And so we're now at the 2015 Lafitte here. So, Peter, do you want to talk about?
I should. I think that brings us on nicely to some individual, unique collection cases that we have here at Waddesdon. So, Ben's mentioned before, but our connection to the Rothschild family and the provenance and authenticity and the way we purchase wine and sell through Waddesdon is, can't really be matched by any other retailer or merchant globally. So we only source wines directly from the cellars of Lafitte and Mouton respectively, and all of their other properties globally. I just wanted to take this time to show you two limited edition exclusive cases that we have here at Waddesdon, which you can't find anywhere else. So Ben, can I ask you just to hold the lid here?
Yeah. Can I hold a bottle? No.
So this is the emblematic collection. So only 80 of these were ever produced. We have 4 currently. The other 75 are currently in private collection and aren't available for sale. So the emblematic case essentially means it's a representation of Lafitte's finest kind of terroir, their finest style through each of these vintages. So there's 5 selected vintages: 2008, 2005, 2000, 1999, and 1985. Now this is the special thing about these cases. So if you just hold the lid, I'll gently open this. So this is a Chateau Lafite 1985. So yet say, for example, they made 25,000 cases in 1985. About 24,500 of these cases would be released onto the open market would be 1989. They hold a very small percentage of these wines back for family or ex-sellers stock, which can be sold at the family's discretion. So usually in 1985 on the open market, you would expect the ullage here, the level of the bottle, to drop. And that happens when a wine is traded globally. You can expect the quality of the wine to deteriorate as well. The ullage will drop. The cork's integrity can be questioned as well. These are ex-cellar bottles. So before the wines leave the chateau, they apply a new cork, a new capsule, and a brand new label. So you can see for a wine that's 35 years old or 36 years old, it's got a brand new label and the fill level is just up here. the rarity, the provenance, and the authenticity of this collection is just completely unrivaled. And more importantly, on the back here, we have a QR bubble code, which enables you to scan the QR code, and it tells you when the wine left the chateau. And Ben, I'm sure you agree, in terms of provenance, that's quite hard to beat.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very important.
I'll just carefully put this back in here.
They're beautifully produced, these Peter. Very nice.
So only 80 ever produced and 4 are available for sale. The other 75 are currently sitting in private collectors.
What's this made of?
Cellars. So this is a wood when it's an external lacquer just to protect the wine. And then we have our next collection, which I'll just move that bottle.
Yep.
If I could just ask you to hold the lid again for me, please. So this is called the 500. So the reason this is called the 500 is that all the great wines of Bordeaux are regularly scored by the critics, and many of these critics will score the wines out of 100. So the 500 being is that each one of these single individual wines, so 3 vintages of Chateau Lafite, a vintage of Lavangille, and a vintage of Rursec, have all scored 100 points. So this is like the perfect collection, perfect representation of DBR's wines. There was only 30 of these made, 26 are sold and in private cellars. We have 4 available still for sale. So this is 1986, 2003 and 96 vintages of Chateau Lafite, a 2000 vintage of Rursec, and a 2000 vintage of Chateau Lavangille. So this is their right back property. So in terms of collection and quality, I mean, Ben, I'm sure you agree, it doesn't really get better than this.
Well, it is like looking at a piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
And in any collections, you have the most extraordinary, you like them or not, you have these extraordinary, almost by dint of sort of universal acclaim that, you know, certain Shakespeare was not a bad writer in England, was he really? And you get the stars of and Lafite. Can I just pass that to you? I mean, again, if you start at the top of the feet, which is what we are, and of course there's so many other wines there, but you know, it didn't happen overnight. Peter says it's been going since the 12th century there. But what did happen overnight was that with the Rothschild owning Chateau Lafite, it suddenly propelled the name, the brand, right to the very top there. And I go back to the family history of Rothschilds, and there is no more illustrious family and influential family than the Rothschilds. It's, you know, it's just wonderful to be able to share these thoughts with you here today.
I think just to recap, this case is obviously of superlative quality, and to have, for the Rothschilds and the Lafite family, to have the class in Pauillac and the representation of Lavangille and Pomerol and in Rursec in Sauternes is just phenomenal. To have that level of quality in each of these really key appellations in Bordeaux is incredible. So the 500, only 30 of them made. I wish we had more to sell, just 4 left, unfortunately. But when things of this quality, they tend not to be produced that readily.
And just without saying anything in particular, but I'll just leave you with one thought before I hand over to Emma, and that is, talk about wine etiquette. The first thing is to enjoy the wine. And the second thing is there's always a misconception of red wine of serving it slightly warm, serving it room temperature. Room temperature does not mean modern day temperature. It means it's cellar, Victorian temperature. So if in doubt, leave the wine slightly chilled, it'll always warm up. But if it's too warm, it'll take away that essential element of balance. And so...
and the alcohol can start to evaporate if it's too hot, which leaves you with a hot, harsh finish. So the ethanol, the alcohol comes through a little bit on the palate. And right at the back of the tongue, you can feel that heat if the wine is too hot. And then you lose that delicate complexity which Lafite is renowned for. So it's cellar temperature to start with, and let that wine kind of unfurl in the glass and let it improve as the evening goes on.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you very much, Peter. 我相信我们线上的朋友们跟我一样，感觉到真的是获益匪浅。那现在呢是问答时间，如果大家有任何的问题，想和我们在场的2位嘉宾进行一些直接的沟通和交流，欢迎在我们的问答框中给我们留言。Hi Ben, actually I have received some questions here already.
Oh.
Yes, the first question is, what do you think the minimum investment in wine to have a cellar for personal use?
Gosh, that's always a fastball. But thank you for asking that. Whoever's asked that, thank you. I think the key thing is to start somewhere, and it doesn't matter if you have 6 bottles to start with, or 12 bottles, or 2 cases, or 10 cases, or 1,000 bottles. You build as you grow. So, in monetary terms, that's up to you. But in terms of variety, if you enjoy wines like these, based Cabernet Sauvignon based wines, they're known to Cabernet Franc, that's one thing. If you enjoy your Pinot Noir, slightly softer skinned grape, therefore slightly lighter wine. If you enjoy lots of other things, just talk to wine merchants, just talk to friends, go with the sort of style, the theme where you want to, say full wine, a light wine, and then just gradually build up and build up for your own use, which is great because, as Peter was saying earlier, you wait for that special occasion. And I might say, Emma, come and have dinner one night. And you might say, yes, thank you. And then I go down to my cellar and I will select a bottle and I'll say, no, I'm not going to. All my bottles in my cellar, the back labels are scuffed completely because actually that's not quite right this night. And I'll pull something else out. And then even if Emma's not coming to dinner and I'm having dinner by myself, then I will make that special occasion by pulling out the bottle I really feel like. So don't worry too much about food and wine pairing. Go with the wine first, and then always with the better wines, the simpler the food.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. So I have another question here. Probably Peter can answer that. Bordeaux's wine can usually be bought in advance. Is it the case for the Chantal Lafite?
Yes, you can. So you can buy Lafite as with any other first growths, and apart from Latour at Grand Cru Crush, you can buy them en primeur or in futures, which is when you buy the wine before it's bottled, so it's still in the barrel. So the wine isn't yet complete. In terms of investment, that can be a sensible option because you're buying it at, say, 50–60% of the cost before it's bottled. And then over that 10-year period in which the wine develops in the bottle till it reaches its drinking window, they can gain capital, gain investment, and you can therefore be in a position where that case is profitable for you to sell, or to sell one case and then drink the other, depending on your opinion, which I think is a nice touch, and that links back into what's
Nice touch, does it have? Do you sell the second case?
It's a no. I think I always like to keep some stock back because once you've sold it, you're always going to wonder what that wine tastes like. And you could be 10, 15, 20 years down the line and have that deep regret that you sold a bottle that is now commanding a huge value and it's gone. And essentially that bottle will never be returned to you unless some very kind of freak occurrence occurs.
But also the other thing I think is that when you create a cellar, and it could be under the stairs, it could be in a little fridge somewhere, it could be under the floorboards, it could be outside, is that once you've done that, it means you have the freedom of actually picking out a particular bottle sort of that you like, and I think it's that freedom of choice there. And if you don't want to share a bottle of wine with your best friend, you'll see them again. So if you're not feeling like it, delay it. Come back next week.
Yes, of course. So there is a question in relation to that. So there's one guest asked, are there some high quality wine fridges as good as traditional cellar?
Okay, I'll go first.
You go first.
I'll go first. As I said in the thought one here, the key thing is the wine must be quiet, undisturbed, laid gently on its side. And historically, that's been possible, usually in basements like this we have, because the temperature is cooler. So if your wine cellar or your wine room has that coolness, and it can vary what, 12 degrees to 15 degrees sort of thing, I suppose, in terms of temperature. The humidity about 70-75% humidity. If you guarantee that, pretty much, then certainly use your cellar or wine room there. But if needs be, again, it's like a kitchen. I mean, to me, a wine cellar is almost as essential as having a kitchen in the house. And some kitchens are big, some are small, some are, so it doesn't really matter. But I think it's certainly going back to my point just now, is keep a wine more on the cold side than on the warm side.
Definitely. That for me, the range is the sweet spot is 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. But the warmer the wine is, the molecules move around quickly and the wine will develop ahead of its time. The closer the wine is to 10 degrees, the slower those molecules move, so the evolution is much more gradual. Back to the question about the refrigeration unit or the wine fridge as such, with technology being so good, with anti-vibration control, with the backup stuff you can have if there's a power cut, you can have very, very good cellar conditions that are provided through a fridge unit. However, I think if you have the room, a natural underground cellar, because there's something about being able to step into that space. And that feeling, for me...
That's a very, very important point, is that a fridge, however useful, is fairly sterile.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you're having your own wine room or a wine cellar, you can create it in the image of how you want to create it. It can be modern, it can be old-fashioned, it can be traditional. It can have enough space to have tastings in, to pour wines and have fun. Invite your friends and your guests into your cellar, which was the original plan here, wasn't it? Invite people here, as we are now here today. And so, not necessarily this huge space here, but it's certainly one is utilitarian, the other definitely joins part of the culture of wine that we're also.
I think we're both heading towards that natural cellar. I think we are.
Me too. So there's another question is, in your opinion, are there any new world wines similar to Bordeaux?
Sorry. Similar to Bordeaux is a right way of putting it, in that similar to Bordeaux means basically a blend of 3 or 4 of the finest grape varieties. But literally just this week, I hear that Ningxiang is targeted now by the Chinese government to a 15-year target to produce, to plant vines and to produce as much wine as in Bordeaux, which is hundreds of billions of litres there. So similarity, it all really depends on where you are on the globe. And Bordeaux and Napa Valley are within roughly 40 degrees latitude. And this province here is also in that sweet spot, to use your phrase, between 30 to 50, 40 degrees. So given the latitude, you're getting a similar climate. That's fine. But it will, even more importantly, depend on the terroir. And if the terroir reflects the best use of the grapes that are like Bordeaux, then yes, definitely. So the Cabernet Sauvignon grape, which is the key ingredient in Bordeaux wines, is a very tough little grape. It's got a very thick skin, unlike Pinot Noir. And so therefore grows anywhere. Peter, do you?
I think it's almost to look at the question in almost a polarized context, whereas rather than Bordeaux being like, or other countries being like Bordeaux, other regions, global warming is making Bordeaux like other regions. So it's almost like Bordeaux's going to meet them rather than trying to emulate Bordeaux. And I mean, Bordeaux's 1.4 degrees warmer it was in the 80s compared to modern vintages now. And that's a problem with winemakers because Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, they like to have a set amount of time on the vine. Global warming means that time is being shortened because the days and the nights are so warm. So you're asking for the development of the grapes internally and externally to happen over a much shorter period of time. And these flavor compounds need cooler nights, warmer days to develop properly. So I would say it's almost look at the question a different way. So Bordeaux is becoming warmer, therefore more like New World vineyards.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ben. Then the last question is how to define old and young wine.
Old and young wine.
Wine.
Oh, as in wine, not vines, but wine. Wine. Okay, wine. Okay. Well, the first way of looking at it is the color. And you'll see here, there's a 6-year-old wine, and you'll see this lovely, fresh fruit, soft, balanced color here. Now, if we had this wine in 50 years' time, in my right hand, can you go and open a bottle of
Why not? Give me
Lafite
2 minutes. I'll just go.
If it was sitting here, it would have mellowed, it would have softened, it would have slightly or take a slightly sort of brownish tinge on it. And when there you get freshness, here you get elegance. So the difference really is in the color, and then in the taste, you would have this freshness of the 6-year-old, but of a 50-year-old wine, you would have that mellowness, that kind of sunset taste and feel to it. And then the other thing is, which is fascinating. I tried it once first with an 1881 bottle of wine, and you first pour a really old bottle. This is 100 years old when I opened it. You pour the first glass, and it's got that bottle stink, and you think, oh God, this is awful. And then you let that go for 2 or 3 minutes, and it comes absolutely perfect. And then, rather like an old favorite grandmother suddenly waking up from her chair, and she's awake for about 10 or 15, 20 minutes, and gradually she goes back to slumber again. And so you really have a very small window of enjoyment of a very old wine, and then it just fades away. So that's what I would say is the principal difference is you have a much longer window. You can drink that really for over the next 2 or 3 hours, whereas a really old one, you've got minutes.
I think it comes down to the quality of the vineyard and that individual wine. So if we look, I think probably the best example is 1982 Lafite. If you looked at 1982 Lafite, which is still incredibly young, it's approaching its 40-year birthday. If you were to look at, say, a 1982 Duhart Millon, which is another Rothschild estate that interlocks with Lafite, so a vineyard right next door, of an 82 is absolutely at full maturity now. So there's 2 individual wines. It's a way of looking at them. When you say the age and maturity, it depends for me personally on the individual wine itself. And there's that saying, there's no such thing as great wines, just great bottles.
Very true, very true.
Individual bottles will develop differently in different cellars. That also plays into the element of buying ex cellars, because you know what you've got has been stored in one condition all of its life. So for me, it's an individual case by case based on that bottle. Sometimes you can open a bottle that you expect to be mature, and actually it's still quite tannic and full of life. So it's a difficult one to put a hat on it in that sense, but it's for me, it's a case by case basis and getting to know that individual wine and how it develops.
And that's why it's always so fun having a collection of wines. You can do this with friends, and you can say, gosh, I've had this bottle for X number of years, and this has turned out well, this has turned out better. That's all part of the fun and games.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, Peter.
Great pleasure.
非常感谢我们在现场的2位嘉宾他们的这个精彩的回答，我们也非常感谢在线上所有朋友们今天的热情参与，和我们一起共度了这样一个非常美好的时光。那关于葡萄酒收藏，关于葡萄酒酒窖的设计，如果大家有进一步的问题，欢迎通过招商银行私人银行的客户经理来跟我们联系。那么在我们活动结束之前，让我再一次有请招商银行私人银行的黄渤先生来到镜头前，和我们嘉宾一起举杯。
Sorry. I like to read as well as drink, so there we are.
对，再一次感谢我们在现场的所有朋友们的这个热情的参与希望大家享受这个葡萄酒陪伴的时光。
干杯！
干杯！
谢谢大家，祝大家拥有一个美好的夜晚。